Alright, so there's a couple of movies on the docket right now that I want to talk to you guys about. And this is the easier of the two to talk about, so I'm going to go ahead and knock it out first. The other one being Puss in Boots. I still plan to talk about the new Puss in Boots movie. It's just, whereas this movie is a really fun ride, I wouldn't feel bad if it were me, if I hadn't seen this movie yet. I wouldn't feel bad if somebody had gone into detail about this movie ahead of time. Like, oh, did you see the part where, oh, and it was so cool when they, stuff like that. Because, well, this movie is certainly fun. It's not, and this is going to sound like a dig, it's not, I promise. It's not really a cerebral film. There's nothing really, like thematically deep about it, right? So I'm just going to gush about this one for a few minutes to try to convince you guys to see it if you haven't. Whereas Puss in Boots, I feel like I actually need to think about what I want to say about that one a little bit. And I'm having trouble deciding exactly what to say. So I guess in preparation for that, in the comments of this video, how spoilery do you feel like it's okay for me to be in the Puss in Boots review? Just so I'll have a baseline to work from. Like, if more than one or two you say you don't want spoilers, I'm not going to put spoilers in it, but if it seems pretty universally cool for me to put spoilers in it, I might talk about some spoilery stuff. So we'll see what happens. Also, if you want more of my thoughts on movies right now, and you just don't care about the D&D movie, first of all, you should still stick around for the review, because I think I can sell you on this movie. But also, I gave a very simple written review of the Mario movie recently on my Tumblr. I'll try to remember to link that specifically. If not, you can find it there. It's pretty easy to find. Let's just say, while I didn't hate it, I'm not as satisfied with it as a lot of people seem to be. So if you're looking for a dissenting series of thoughts on that movie, maybe that post is the place to go. I will not be talking about it in video form, though. I don't care enough about it. It didn't really do it for me enough for me to care enough about it for me to do that. Apologies to anyone who was really desperate to hear me talk about the Super Mario Brothers movie. That said, I was super excited about this movie, even though I'm not the biggest fan of Wizards of the Coast. And I'm not the biggest fan of Hasbro either. Aren't they the two groups right now that basically own the license to this property? Yeah, I think that sounds right. Because Hasbro's making the toys or something, right? Yeah, that sounds right. I didn't look it up. I should have looked it up. Wizards of the Coast, in particular, though, is in control of the game side of things. Something is rumbling in the background. I think my washing machine is out of balance, but I don't care. I'm gonna push through and I'm gonna record this video. Yeah, the state of Dungeons and Dragons right now, it's better than it was several weeks ago, but it's not great. The people behind designing the game could definitely be doing a better job. But I'm a huge fan of Dungeons & Dragons. I can't remember exactly what edition we played, but my friends and I played a campaign through, high schoolish era. It went on for years, and we're getting ready to replay through a sort of a redux version of the campaign any day now that I'm actually designing the world for. It's been a lot of fun. But yes, in case you couldn't tell from the everything about me, I am a D&D nerd, and I've really been getting into 5th edition lately. It's really accessible, right? So I'm kind of obsessed with it. I like making characters and stuff. I play Druid primarily, maybe a few levels in Ranger for flavor and so that my animal friend can do more stuff. But 5e Ranger's not great. and there's going to be disagreement on this. 5e Druid is the best caster in the game. So I didn't take a lot of levels in Ranger, let's put it that way. Want those high level spells. Anyway, obviously I was excited about this movie. From just the trailers, from just the announcement material and then the trailers, it seemed very clear that they wanted this to feel like a D&D campaign, or at least a movie-sized chunk of one. And it does so much. I don't want to compare it to something like Critical Role, because an argument could be made that Critical Role is as bad for D&D as it is good for D&D. But it really kind of feels like they were trying to do something like that. Like, not literally the sit at a table and record your campaign thing, but like the animated show that's airing. I think it's still ongoing, right? Based on the first Critical Role campaign. Something like that, just in a cinematic fashion. This episode is broken up into what feels very much like encounters in a Dungeons & Dragons game, punctuated by downtime in a Dungeons & Dragons game, where the characters use their skills and abilities to get out of those encounters. And then in their downtime, they have their character development. And yeah, you could argue that a lot of movies are like that. But like specifically a Dungeons & Dragons movie that doesn't try to be, like, format-wise something different and embraces that, it speaks to the understanding of the people who produce this thing. Some of the characters know each other, some of them don't, some of them know each other better than others. All of them have backstories that feed into the choices they make, but aren't so incredibly dense that they bog the story down. They're easy to get, they're easily digestible. The places are places from actual D&D lore, and while I don't know D&D lore super well, even I was able to recognize that. The characters are witty and bantery the way that actual players would be with each other at the table. When the bard is trying to convince somebody, you can practically hear the dice being rolled as he makes his skill check. Spells, they're named like the spells in the game. Like, that seems like it would be such an obvious thing. But, like, couldn't you imagine an adaptation of this where the magic is just generic fantasy magic system magic instead of literally what you get in the game? Because I certainly can, and I was worried up until they started naming spells and talking about attuning to magic items and, like, specifically calling out where the sorcerer gets his magic power from. I was worried that something like that was going to happen until those moments. And unsurprising, considering that I'm a druid main, the best character in this, I thought, was the druid character. Doric, I think was her name. Not only do I think the actress is just fantastic and has a very bright future ahead of her, but I liked her backstory. It was the kind of backstory I might have given one of my characters. And the realization of her abilities as a druid were just spectacular. Her use of wild shape was perfect. Like, it's exactly the way a moon druid would use wild shape in a game. Utilizing smaller forms for infiltration and information gathering, but larger forms for combat. I don't recall her using any druid magic, because wild shape really isn't magic. But that's fine. Like not all druid players play as casters. If anything, I feel like the main weakness in this movie was that even though what we did see of the magic and the skills and the places and the abilities from the game, in a movie with the relatively limited runtime of a movie, there just wasn't time here for them to go as hard as they could have. Like, they still went pretty hard. The final boss was a wizard, and she was using some pretty crazy magic. So it's not like they were misrepresenting anything. It's just there wasn't time to explore the fact that, like, Chris Pine's character is a bard. Bards do have magic. It may not be what they specialize in or what their niche is in the party. They may not be the party's primary caster, but they do have magic. He didn't seem to have magic. And the druid didn't seem to be much of a caster, when druids are, again, in my opinion, the best casters in the game. At least in the context of 5th edition, except maybe wizards. And like one of the main plot threads in the movie was that they needed an item to resurrect someone. Whereas resurrection magic is a thing in Dungeons and Dragons and is fairly common. But like, man, I can understand that. I can understand them making the choice not to worry about all of that. Because this is a movie and not a game. Let's use resurrection magic as an example. Resurrection magic has to be fairly common in the game, because if you don't want to roll up a new character, the other characters have to be able to resurrect your character when your character inevitably dies. In a movie where the dramatic stakes have to be conducive to a movie, making something like resurrection magic less common only makes sense. Just like, I'm fairly certain, I caught this, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain the villain cast multiple 9th level spells in the final battle, which if you're following 5th edition rules just is not a thing that can happen. I mean, I guess it technically could, like you'd have to finagle some rules to get it to work, but it's not a thing that can typically happen. And Doric's use of wild shape, using it so much and so often, she would have had to have been an absurdly high level to do that. And then she could have just soloed the boss. And literally every challenge that the characters faced in this movie entirely by herself. So clearly she wasn't. We're talking, in order for a druid to wild shape as much as they want, like that, you'd have to basically be a god. But it doesn't matter, because it's conducive to the story. And let's say this was a Dungeons & Dragons campaign being translated to movie form. Your DM could just rule differently than what's in the books, right? So it doesn't matter anyway. All that matters is that it's fun. All that matters is that you're having fun. And in the context of the movie, in the context of this being a movie, that means what matters is whether or not the audience is having fun. And I think this movie is just a riot to watch. Every encounter is so interesting. The characters interact in such fun and believable ways. Even the paladin character who bamfs in, solves some of the party's problems, and then leaves is a fun character in his own right. The way that the other characters react to him and interact with him is fun. And he's a fun reference to the concept of a DMPC, if you know what that is. A character controlled by the dungeon master who might come in and steal the show every once in a while. There's layers to this character, not so much as a character, but in terms of their role in the story. And if you understand more about Dungeons & Dragons than the average person, then you will pick up on more of those layers, and you might enjoy this more than just a general layperson. But the general layperson is still going to find this guy's like taking down an entire group of enemies thrilling, and they're going to find his personality weirdly charming, because he is weirdly charming in this like almost MCU Drax kind of way, where he takes things too literally. And the friendship between arguably the two main characters of this movie not only serves as an excellent emotional through line, it makes it a little predictable where things are going to go by the end. I had a pretty good idea of what was actually going to happen by the end once they got their hands on the MacGuffin they wanted. But it doesn't detract anything from the story, because it works so well as a solid emotional through line for the movie. If anything, my only real tangible issue with this movie, as the thing that it is that we get this long backstory for the pair of them and their old party that they've now split off from in the very beginning of the movie. And it's given as exposition through flashback with some comedic stuff thrown in to keep it fresh. It's actually one of the better done exposition scenes I think I've ever seen. That entire backstory, though, that entire exposited backstory, could have been a movie on its own, and I kind of wish it had been. I kind of wish that had been part one and this had been the sequel. But when the only problem that I have with a movie that actually holds up to any amount of scrutiny is that there's not more of the movie, I consider that to be a pretty successful movie. I liked it a lot. It wasn't it's not a masterpiece. And if you're somebody who's a fan of Tolkien-esque fantasy, this really isn't going to be for you. This is more an action adventure with a fantasy flair and some nods to this game that some people like to keep things spicy. But it's still a really good time, and it's a really solid movie, and I hope they make more of these. I think they're already planning to, but in case they're not, I hope they do. I don't know how many clips I'm going to be able to put in this, because I'm going to have to stick with stuff from the trailers that YouTube won't claim. But in the off chance that I wasn't able to put any clips in here without getting the video claimed, I'll also try to remember to put a link to the trailer for this movie, whichever one I think is best, because there's multiple trailers, I think, in the description of this video too. Go check it out. If you weren't planning on giving this movie the time of day, I seriously recommend reconsidering. I think if you come here and you enjoy the kinds of things that I like, you'll like this too. That said, though, if you guys have seen the Dungeons & Dragons movie, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else who you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.